Kristaps Porzingis is now a Celtic, and it seems like everybody loves this trade for Boston. Not only do they get a high upside spacing big man in Kristaps Porzingis, but they got incredible value for Marcus Smart. But with this specific Celtics team, I have some real concerns about how all of this is going to work. But let's talk about the positive first. So first and foremost, everybody talks about the spacing that Kristaps Porzingis is going to provide. You can see that here. He's one of the better big man shooters in the entire league. When you talk about, he's up there with Karl Anthony Towns, a couple of other guys. And when you have someone that's that big, that is going to provide the defensive impact that he is, that we're going to talk about a little bit later, and can space the floor, that's incredibly impactful. You can just imagine scenarios in which Porzingis is out there as the only big, or he's out there alongside Al Horford or maybe another floor spacing guy that they get in free agency, and the lane is completely wide open for Tatum and Brown, these guys to get to the rim. And we know that Boston really wants to shoot a ton of threes. It's a big part of what they do. And you can just see all the little pick and pop stuff for Porzingis, dragging back to the top of the key, and all of a sudden this guy's in the lane, or he's wide open for a three, or you swing it to him in the corner. You can see all that stuff and exactly how that's going to work and how that's going to fit alongside not only Rob Williams offensively, but of course Al Horford as well. Now, I have some concerns in terms of his fit and his ability to play alongside those guys that we're going to talk about later, but certainly the spacing is a big positive for him. And then of course the other positive here, anytime that you are swapping out in the first version of the trade Malcolm Brogdon and the real version of the trade Marcus Smart, you're swapping out a guard for a big. Boston wanted to add size to their team, and Porzingis certainly does that, especially defensively. For pretty much the entirety of his career, he's been a good to great rim protector, has really good size, moves his feet decently well within the paint, and just his overall length and his size is a real benefit to pretty much any defensive structure. And offensively, especially in this most recent season in Washington, he got better in his ability to punish some of the mismatches. Famously, they used to put, Marcus Smart on Kristaps Porzingis in the post. He's never been a punishing post player, and he never really will be. But if you look at some of the post-up numbers from last year and see some of his post-ups, he did add a little bit more there to his game, was a little bit more punishing at times, and that's going to help add a bit of a different dimension to Boston's offense that they've never really had. Okay, but based strictly off the title of the video, we now need to talk about the negatives of this deal, right? So for me, the biggest issue with this is defensively. Think about when Boston was at their best, when they were running through the rest of the league, when they went to the finals, when they almost won a title. The foundation of that team was defense. And part of that foundation certainly was Marcus Smart, but more than that, it was their ability to switch pretty much everything on the floor. Everybody but Rob Williams was able to switch, and basically you were switching into a similar sized player with a similar level of play defensively. Like you could switch from Jason Tatum to Jaylen Brown to Marcus Smart and have accomplished literally nothing in any of your actions, and Boston never lost a step because they always switched in front of it. And the notable exception to that, and the guy that really made everything work and elevated their defense, was Rob Williams, because they started playing two bigs together. They had Al Horford and they had Rob Williams together in the Ime Udoka season, and everybody but Williams, for the most part, switched everything, and he was able to just pick the worst shooter on the floor, roam, and if anything did happen, he was able to clean up any individual defensive mistake. But it's important to note now in the context of the Porzingis trade that he really wasn't allowed to switch that much. And in this most recent season, you can see plenty of clips on screen here when they went with one big and it was only Rob Williams, or when they tried to play him alongside Al Horford, teams really did try to attack not only his ball screen defense, but if they did get him in a switch, that was something that teams desperately wanted to attack. As great as Rob Williams is as a rim protector when he's healthy, he is someone that you can attack in ball screens and in isolations, and there is clip after clip of this most recent season where teams' entire offensive objective for an entire possession was to put Rob Williams at a disadvantage. It was the best way that they could attack Boston's defense. And generally speaking, if he's healthy and Al Horford's playing well, that's fine. It's not a big deal. However, when you introduce Kristaps Porzingis into this equation, he defensively falls into the exact same role as Rob Williams. You can go and find basically identical clips of teams trying to get Porzingis in ball screens, trying to get him in isolations and attack him in the pick and roll. And of course, the way you combat that if you're Washington is you put him in like the Brook Lopez style of defense where he's dropping to the rim. You're maybe giving up a little bit in terms of three-point shooting and shrinking in a little bit to try and protect against the pick and roll, but you let him drop to the rim and let him be that rim protector. It's what Boston likes to do a lot with Rob Williams as well. However, everybody's talking about this trade as if Porzingis is going to be out there alongside Williams and alongside Horford. I don't think defensively that structure is going to hold up nearly as well as people think, and certainly not as well as when Boston was truly at their best. You cannot put both Porzingis and Rob Williams on the floor, and certainly you can't switch with those guys, but also you're putting two limited foot speed defenders on the floor that are going to be attacked relentlessly by other teams around the league. Now, there certainly are things you can do to mitigate that, and against certain lineups, it's going to look really good. If teams, ironically, if they're playing a team like Memphis that doesn't have a ton of spacing and you have two non-shooters or two guys that aren't great in terms of shooting the ball, yeah, you can survive with both Porzingis and Williams out there, and there's going to be scenarios in which having that much length and having that much rim protection is really going to benefit them. But if you go back and look at some of the clips from last season between Williams and Porzingis, you're going to see a lot of similar deficiencies defensively. But that really isn't the only issue that I have here in terms of how it changes Boston's team, because no matter what you think about Marcus Smart as a player overall, he was the best passer on the team. He wasn't a great passer, but he was the best passer on the team. And for a team that already was kind of clunky, especially late in games, that's a big question mark now for this team moving forward. It's going to put a lot more on Derek White, who had an awesome season last year. It's going to put a lot more on the playmaking development of Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum, and taking that piece out of there. Again, going back to when Boston was at their best, they had this great switchable defense with all these, defenders with good size. And then they had Marcus Smart basically being the point guard for the first time in his entire career. And that was the formula that took them to the finals. And it's a formula that with this trade, they're basically going completely away from. Now, I think a counter to that a lot of people are going to mention is that Porzingis provides this other element for Boston offensively. Obviously, the floor spacing big that is much more of a threat. I mean, Al Horford can make threes, but Porzingis is much more of a threat on the perimeter than Horford is. But then also they're going to point to some of those post-up stats from Washington last year where he was better in the post, was a little bit more punishing. I don't know that I fully trust those numbers, and I don't think that's something that you're really going to be going to a lot when either Brown or Tatum are on the floor, and one of them is going to be out there pretty much at all times. And so in theory, it does provide this new dimension to the offense of having, Porzingis and Horford and Brown and Tatum and White, all those guys on the floor. That's a really intriguing offensive lineup. But there are some defensive issues with Porzingis, as I mentioned earlier, and also all this really neat, cool stuff that everybody likes to talk about in terms of what Porzingis was better at in Washington last year. I don't really think he's going to have the chance to showcase it that much, because I don't think it's going to be much more efficient than just running their regular offense. So to me, the version of Porzingis that Boston is probably going to end up with is much closer to what we saw in Dallas rather than what we saw in Washington last year. Bradley Beal didn't play that much. Kyle Kuzma was the next best guy on the team. They really prioritized a lot of Porzingis stuff within their offense. But if you go back and look at his days in Dallas, he's a 7'3" shooting guard that's relegated to just trying to hit spot up jumpers. And anytime they tried to go into anything in isolation or post ups or prioritizing within the offense in any real meaningful way alongside Luka, it was a negative for their team. And so you can talk about the defensive issues as I have throughout the entire video. But as much as everybody is excited about the offensive stuff, I think we're starting to forget a little bit just who Kristaps Porzingis is, with the exception mostly of last season. And although the value in the trade, generally speaking, is great, I think people are overestimating how good the fit is, specifically within the front court, not to mention the injury issues between any of these three guys. Al Horford is almost 40. Rob Williams is always hurt. Kristaps Porzingis is almost always hurt with the exception of last season. And so even though everything looks really cool on paper, there's great upside here, I think it's distinctly possible that Boston just traded one of their best defenders in Marcus Smart for a 7'3" shooting guard on offense that also poses some pretty massive issues for them defensively with the current construction of their roster.